Hello guys, welcome back to Buttons War, and today we will take a look at AK-47 Republic rule set with the second edition, or as it's known, Reloaded, which is, well, Wargame with fog of war. While the Cold War never escalated into a hot phase in Europe, it did merge with, often bloody, decolonization in Africa and Asia, and the Western and Eastern blocs engaged in many major and minor wars with supplies of weapons and equipment, and often advisors or volunteers. The iconic weapon of this conflict was the Soviet Kalashnikov rifle, whose importance is evident by the fact that it is also on the flag of the African nation of Mozambique, and after which are AK-47 Republic rule sets by Peter Big Name, who also published his own line of 50mm figures for the game. And what defines the conflict in Africa is that the very different quality of equipment and training of the soldiers of the different size, and the fact that the super modern equipment is there versus old scrap metal. You know, even in the 80s, there were Shermans and T-44 tanks. As well is the pervasive chaos and, well, indiscipline that is compared to the regular Western war. But AK-47 Republic managed to capture this all well in one of the cornerstones of the game. The rules divide all units into three quality levels: militia, regular soldiers, and professionals, which determines how they perform in the game. Similarly, there are three different categories for equipment, which in turn is divided into old, classic, and modern, allowing players to deploy virtually anything they have in their model collection, and the rules can handle it without the opposing player having to intricately figure out what models to take or what time spent to set their collections in. The rules have already sorted out for the players. If you are playing a game set, for example, in 1960s, the T-55 tank will be modern vehicle. In the game set in the 80s, it will be a regular tank. And on the 21st century battlefield, well, it will be old scrap. Although, even that didn't stop Russia from taking them out on the battlefields of Ukraine in 2023. Apart from ordinary infantrymen and tanks, the game has everything that belongs on the battlefield of the second half of the 20th century. So guns, armored vehicles, heavy machine guns, mortars, rocket launchers, truck, armored personnel carriers, but also relatively modern weapons like anti-tank missiles. And of course, no desert conflict can be completed without Toyota with automatic cannon. However, the choice of unit and its quality is limited by which of the 20 factions, 15 for Africa and 5 for Middle East, you choose. And just as equipment is not bought specifically, but loosely through its type, the factions work almost identically. So if you want to play, for example, Rhodesia or South Africa, they are not in the game as factions, but you can build an army list by faction for colonial settlers or white colonial army. If you want Americans in Mogadishu, well, then you build your army according to Western Intervention Force. Do you want Cubans in Angola? Well, go for Eastern Intervention Army. Although the real charm of Africa also lies in the unlimited possibilities to build your own little army according to your imaginations. 20 factions means you can find rules for just about anything you want. There is faction for dictators, religious cults, Western or Eastern armed armies, savage armies, professional mercenaries, communist revolutionaries, or the aforementioned foreign intervention forces. The choice of faction then determines not only how good you are allowed to buy your troops and equipment, but also what weapons your faction will have access to. So, for example, People's Revolutionary Army has lots of militia, but basically no heavy weapons or, heaven forbid, air force, while the American Interventionist Army, on the other hand, has numerically small but obligatorily mechanized army with pros of total off-table material superiority. In addition to units themselves, the faction selection determines one of the important mechanics of AK-47 Republic, which is a mini-game/event series called 15 Days to War. In most games, you buy models with points and stack them on the table where the battle ensues. That's not the case in AK-47, because first you and your opponent have to go through a series of 3 weeks, but only 15 days, because after all, you rest and don't fight on weekends. when you both simultaneously but secretly deal dice on calendar, abstractly symbolizing your resources for political fight or some minor military skirmishes before the main battle. Each day, therefore, you roll pre-allocated dice, and whatever rolls more success wins political/military superiority that day, which gives the players the opportunity to use the biddings to roll on the faction random event table. Of course, if that comes a problem, you roll 2 dice, but the possibilities are 12 to 18. And needless to say, the better stuff is on a higher number that you can roll on just 2 dice. There's a calculation or risk involved where you can say you are saving resources and go feed another day without a reward, since you are rolling 5 dice next day, or possibly 7 more if you are lucky enough to win 3 days in a row. Beware, however, if you lose without rolling for rewards, you lose your accumulated wins and get no reward at all. The table varies dramatically by faction. In some armies, the bottom ranks are table of penalties rather than rewards, but it perfectly reflects the spirit of the specific factions, which makes them play out differently even before the actual game begins. So, religious cult can, with bit of luck, get huge moral bonuses because the divine omens wish it, but equally, an army can half disintegrate before it reaches the battlefield because, the gods omens don't wish you well at all. Colonial armies buy modern equipments on the black market. Revolutionary armies get bonuses through government defectors or lose soldiers through party purges. And how you fare during this prelude to battle determined also will be attacker and defender in the following classic wargaming battle, as you know. And a lot of the events in the table work with reserve box, which is not just mechanic name but is also literally psychical box that you have models in reserve that you put on the table at the start of the game. In 15 Days to War, you can move your units to or from reserves, and so does your opponent. In the game, this mechanic perfectly simulates the fog of war, where you as player can see all your and your opponent's units anywhere on the table, but your soldiers don't have this ability to see everything everywhere in real battle, and so you as the player make decisions that your soldiers would not make in real situations. For example, you know that there is tank hidden around the corner, and conversely, you know that the next street is empty. This confusion in combat is exactly what the reserve box does for us, because here the reserve don't come from edge of the table, although the game does of course have this basic concept of reinforcements, but instead you roll on the table to decide what, if any, reserves to call on the table and then simply place them in an existing unit already on the table. This simulates that the unit was around corner out of sight on the table, fighting of soldiers, or waiting somewhere hidden in ambush. It's not always entirely realistic, as it can teleport tank into previously created dead end street, but it's interesting attempt to simulate the messiness of combat and way to introduce a new tactical elements to the game that players must constantly reckon with. The game itself then behaves as well. We are used in similar wargames, except for two specifics. All movement if the game is random and is generated by rolling two six-sided dice, which is a large variation from 12 inches, which adds even more uncertainty, randomness, and opacity to combat. Of course, there are modifiers like fixed plus 6 inches for vehicles or dice rolls for professionals. But at its core, movement is very much about randomness, which is the kind of thing that can bother some people and feel like complete nonsense. But for me, true, it's an interesting way to somehow use game mechanics to get closer to simulating that not everything always has to go according to plan, and it's just a way to generate command friction. Plus, we are talking about African militias in most cases, which, just around anywhere near the level of NATO armies. The random movement also goes hand in hand with relatively short range of weapons, with the rifle shooting only 10 inches instead of the classic 24, as in the vast majority of games, which isn't the most surprising mechanic for shooting too. That is the fact that it's simultaneous. It's not rocket science, but it's an interesting way to avoid the shooting of most other games, where units take turn shooting at each other when it's, and wait, when it's their turn. In extreme cases, alternating fighting can lead to situations where the starting side shoots the opponent before he's even properly able to start his first tune. They are waving into the gun lines from Warhammer 40k. In AK-47 Republic, you open fire on unit, roll dice. The opponent does the same, albeit with one less die to give the attacker some advantage. Add modifiers, and if the difference is at least 5 plus, the losing unit gets pinned and dies on 6 plus. So it could be that bunch of militiamen run out with RPG on modern tank or group of professionals, and not only that they do nothing, but if they are unlucky, well, they die by their own activation. It's another good mechanic that both simulates the fact that both sides can shoot into firefight and not wait for their turn, and it also avoids situations where players try their luck and activate units too short with little chances of success, thinking there is no threat and maybe I'll roll that sixes. In AK-47, that risk may not pay off. That said, the mechanics of simulations combat are nothing shocking and are included in virtually every wargaming rulebook, but they just tend to be exclusive to melee combat. But let me not speak only in superlatives. The game, of course, as every game, has its own sides. The first is that the AK-47 Republic is relatively, well, much about rolling dice. Granted, most of the time you roll one, at most two dice, but you roll them all the time, on everything. We will demonstrate this with, well, sort of example when you go and activate a unit. You roll how many inches it moves. Then you roll how many soldiers in the unit will shoot. Then you roll on the actual shooting. If you roll the same numbers on two dice at a time, you roll on the random event table to see what happens. One of the events is Arrival of River, reserves. So you then roll on the reserves table to see what reserves can be called up, and it's just, well, it's still rolling all the time. The game has a bunch of modifiers, shooting alone has around 20, which can annoy a lot of people because then their army may not give the consistent results they want, because then they don't roll everything. And even if two spikes are lost in the amount of rolls, people's minds are more likely to remember how I rolled all the ones and didn't get the tongue out of the mud, or how Charles rolled two sixes and blew out my pros like candle with his militia. The second criticism relates to the fact that the first edition of the game was released in 1997, and the second edition, which I'm with at the moment, is from 2009, which brings with the mischief of the rules as a manual to play and not engaging book with tons of pretty pictures. The layout isn't, well, terribly ancient, as I would say, for Crossfire, which is also great rule set, and I have a review on it on my channel, but also it's far from the beautiful books like Bold Action or Saga, which I also have reviews on my YouTube channel. The rules are still written in the endless blocks of text, but there are some explanatory tables, diagrams, and photos of the models for your enjoyment, so that it's at least something, but also it's still retro, so they are black and white. On the other hand, if one learns how to read these, well, instructional manual rules, they are very easy to play by and easy to find anything you want or need to find in the rules, because everything is altogether in coherent vein and one doesn't have to look for the rules between pictures of models and look it up on the pages like that. It just looks like a, well, washing machine manual, but then again, due its HN design, the PDF version of the rule costs £9 and the printed version is £16, which is not more than, lunch money. So if you are not sure if the rules are for you, it's still just £9. It's not some big investigation. And despite its age, AK-47 Republic is still a popular rule set that has vibrant online community and number of modifications for conflicts other than Africa. This makes it not too much of a problem to use them outside of Africa, and the rule set has been used for every irregular war in the 20th century, from the Russian Civil War to Afghanistan. And later there have been people trying to play the current war in Ukraine by the AK-47 rules as well. There are fan-made adaptations as well that brings more options and realism to the game. For example, AK-74 modification with 15 pages It sells just for the fun modifications, adds stuff like reactive armors to the rules, and more reactive, uh, more realistic stuff. For example, the reactive armor, which I mentioned, in the AK-74 there are 5 types of it, each with each with reacts differently with different type of weapons. So anyone who finds the game too simple, well, community will take care of you. The fact that the game is still being played more than 20 years after its release, and people are inventing alternating army lists for it to play, well, I'm not sure if it's their better sign of quality than the fact that there is still community more than 20 years after release. So, getting at the end, and here goes my verdict. AK-47 Republic is incredibly fun game. Even after so many years since its release, it still offers an unusual experience that can surprise with the novelty of some of its mechanics. If you are looking for a game about irregular warfare in the 20th, 20th century, AK-47 is probably the best game to reach for. It offers a great balance between brevity and fun rules, but still offers a relatively simplistic gameplay experience. After the problem with it can be the high level of randomness and the team, which might not suit everyone as it's sort of sensitive topic, but a lot of people might find insensitive not only to play such team but also to collect models for it. But that's general problem with modern wargaming, and there are folks which have moral issues even with the Second World War. So that was it. If you like the video, don't forget also to click the like button. If you have any questions or want to add something, there is comment sections for it. And if you don't want to miss the next video, click the subscribe button. And I hope there will be another video. And fact that I said AK-47 like 20, 30 times didn't trigger some sort of YouTube algorithm, and there will be some new videos after it. So that was Spot Answer, and hopefully see you on the next one. Bye guys.